I'm back with the ninth video in my Stormlight Archive recap, starting with the Way of Kings, and now we're going to jump back into part 3 with Shallan's POVs. So we open with Shallan talking to her brother via span read, and she's telling him that she hasn't stolen the Fabrial yet, but she thinks her best opportunity will be when Yasna makes her a bathing attendant. So we're waiting for that. And then her brother also updates her that their father, Stuart, is now dead, which sucks because he's the one who knew how to use the Fabrial. Also, he might have been involved in some shady organization along with her father because these men showed up apparently knowing about the Fabrial and asking for it back. And they also had this symbol that he saw on the Steward and these men that he sent to Shallan, so she knows what this looks like. Now, Yasna has mostly been having Shallan study the circumstances leading up to Gavilar's death. And through this, also, Yasna and Shallan have been getting to know each other, and Shallan definitely is going to feel bad stealing the Fabrial from her. And she's also going to miss this. Like, she is genuinely enjoying the scholarship that she's doing. Things start to take an interesting turn when the king, Taravangian, requests a portrait from Shallan, and she starts working on it. She kind of lets her mind wander, and then she looks down, and there's these weird, like, symbol head creatures behind the king. So she scraps her paper. They're like, "Are you good?" She's like, "Oh, I made a mistake," and goes off, and Yasna gives her time to make a new portrait. So now that Stuart is dead, Shallan not only needs to steal the Fabrial, but she also needs to learn how to use it. So she's been like covertly trying to study Yasna using it. We also learn that there are technically 10 essences of soul casting. Shallan and the Ardent Capsule have been talking even more. There's definitely some undertones of flirtation there, and he's starting to bring her bread and jam. This will be important later. And then Yasna talks to her and she's like, "So has he asked you to steal my Fabrial yet?" And she's like, "Huh?" So Yasna is definitely suspect of Capsule. Yasna and Shallan talk about how Gavilar must have wanted something from the Parshendi, and their best guess is that it was their shards, even though there is no official, talk of exchanging shards or anything like that in the treaty agreement, but they think, he must have wanted something, and that's what it probably was. And then Yasna takes Shallan on a little field trip into a dark alley in the middle of the night to give her a philosophy lesson hands on. And by that, I mean Yasna draws out some criminals who are going to attack them and murders them gruesomely with soul casting. She turns one into vapor, one into stone, ice, fire. It's very traumatizing for Shallan, but it is a lesson in philosophy because it's like, yeah, they were out there. It's like the classic Facebook argument, of can a woman walk down the street and whatever she wants, and like she's asking for it, or she should be able to, and it's the men's fault. Um, and we also get a little backstory that this city has had a problem with these attackers, and the king couldn't do anything. So Yasna's like, "Well, I just saved however many people by killing these men," but this angers Shallan. Like, she does not think Yasna had, even if she was like morally just in some ways in what she did, seeing her do that still really made her see Yasna in a different light. And it's seeing her do that that actually pushes Shallan to make the switch with the Fabrials, because she has become her bathing attendant, but she skipped over an opportunity to make the switch before. But after seeing this, she's like, "Fuck this bitch," and she does the switch. Shallan tells her brother via Spanreed that she does have the Fabrial, but instead of heading home right away, which would definitely arise suspicion, she's going to hang around for a few weeks and see if she got away with it. In the meantime, she tries to use it, and she has no luck. We get another weird moment in Shallan's room. She hears a voice say, "What are you?" And she doesn't know what caused that. And then in the meantime, again, she's trying to learn the Soulcaster. She's not having good luck. She does sneak into Yasna's room at one point and rifles through her notes, and she just sees stuff on Urithiru and the Voidbringers, but doesn't find anything concrete on how to use the Fabrial. And then there's more flirting with Capsule. There's emphasis on the shift in Gavilar when Yasna and Shallan are talking, and Shallan's going through his old notes about how he really did dive into the Parshendi and how they had like a culture and religion and all these things. And it's like he went from a warrior personality to almost like a scholar. And Yasna tells her, not everybody picked up on that back then. It took them quite a while to catch up. Also important to note that back then, during their first encounters, when the Parshendi saw the Parshmen, they asked, "Where is their music?" It was also Dalinar who first came across the Parshendi, and it's mentioned how they had simple clothing but like advanced looking weaponry. Shallan ends up asking Yasna, what is Urithiru? And Yasna tells her it was like the center of the Silver Kingdoms, and it had these 10 thrones for 10 kings, and it was like the most amazing, incredible city. But, there's no record of it and no, like geological location for it right now in modern times. And Shallan's like, well, the Parshendi must have gotten their weapons from somewhere. Like, it's got to be out there and not in Notton, the Shattered Plains. And Yazna's like, no, it's not there. Shallan ends up talking to Capsule about the Voidbringers, and he talks to her about how the Knights Radiant fought them 99 times, and then there was the final desolation where the Voidbringers were sent back to the Tranquiline Hills, and the Heralds followed them there. Now, we know from the prelude that the Voidbringers were not defeated on that 99th time. The Heralds lied about that. And then we all get a little secondhand embarrassment because Shallan ends up telling Capsule she's leaving, and he starts talking about, leaving the Ardentia for her, going with her, how they've been courting, and he can tell from her face that he's like, that's not an option. And then he asks for a portrait, and it is super awkward. She does the portrait for him, and then that also ends up looking wrong. Like, there's the symbol head creatures around him too. She ends up panicking and running away to her room where she continuously draws, and then she keeps seeing these symbol heads around her, like they're getting closer to her. It's freaking her out. And then she hears them. They say, "What are you?" And she says, "I'm terrified." And they say, "This is true." And then pop, she like disappears from where she was, and she ends up in Shadesmar. She's just in this endless sea of beads, and she ends up like feeling one of these beads, and it's like, oh yeah, I can change for you. And then when she arrives back in her room, the goblet that was on her bedside table is now blood. That's not conspicuous at all. And then she hears Yasna outside of her door, and she panics. She's like, she has to cover this up somehow. So she takes like a broken shard of something that broke and cuts her own arm. Now you can imagine how bad this looks to walk into the room and see her, her arm cut open, blood all over the place. It doesn't look good. So she's essentially put on like a 72-hour watch in the hospital. The king stops by. He won't let her out, but he does allow her visitors. And then Yasna shows up. She apologizes in her own way. She assumes she's pushed Shallan too far, and that's why she did this. And then Capsule shows up, and he has more bread and jam for her, and he really wants her to eat the jam after she eats some of the bread. But Yasna had grabbed it and sniffed it, and then she gives it back to Shallan, and Shallan's like, this smells horrible, like, I'm not eating that. And Capsule starts freaking out, and then we realize he poisoned her, but he also ate some of the bread to not look suspicious. And so everything fades to black. Or sorry, before it faded to black, and she realizes she's been poisoned, and Yasna tries to save her with her fabrial. Shallan has to admit that she stole it, because Yasna needs a working fabrial, supposedly, to save Shallan. So she tells her, she takes it, and then things fade to black. And then when she comes to, we see her talk to Yasna, and she explains, the circumstances of her father's death and this scheme she was going to do. Yasna is obviously very disappointed in her. This is like an all-time low for Shallan, and Capsule is dead. And that's where we end her part of part 3. And then in my next video, we'll jump into part 4. And by part 4, I mean the interludes, of course, because we all know Sanderson loves those.